My grandmother died 3 weeks before my wedding, and the last thing she ever said to me was, "Don't marry him." I thought it was the morphine talking. I thought grief and fear and a 91-year-old mind slipping between decades had scrambled her words into something that didn't mean anything. I held her hand and I told her I loved her and I promised her everything would be fine because that's what you do when someone you love is dying. You promise them peace even when you can't give it to them. I didn't know that promise would come back to choke me 4 months later, standing in a stranger's kitchen, staring at a photograph that shouldn't have existed. His name is Daniel. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue 2 years ago, and if you told me that night that I'd end up canceling a wedding because of something I found in his mother's hallway, I would have laughed you out of the room. Daniel was steady. Daniel remembered how I took my coffee after the second date. Daniel called his mother every Sunday like clockwork, which I thought at the time was the sweetest thing I'd ever seen in a man. I used to tell my friends that finding someone who loved his mother that much meant he knew how to love a woman properly. I didn't understand yet that there's a difference between loving your mother and never having left her. My grandmother met him exactly once, at Thanksgiving 6 months before she passed. She didn't say much that day. She watched him. She watched the way he answered his phone the second his mother's name lit up the screen. Mid-conversation, no apology, like the rest of us simply paused until he was finished. She watched the way he flinched, actually flinched, when I mentioned that his mother hadn't RSVP'd yet for the wedding. That night, after everyone left, my grandmother pulled me into the kitchen and asked me one question. She asked me who was really going to be standing at the altar with me. I told her Daniel, obviously. She shook her head and said that a man can be standing in one room and living in another, and that I should look very carefully at which room he actually lived in before I signed my name to anything. I didn't look carefully. I was 28 and in love and grieving, and grief has a way of making you cling harder to the things that feel certain, even when they aren't. So I planned the wedding, I picked the flowers, I said yes to a dress that cost more than my first car. And every single decision, every fitting, every venue walkthrough ran through one filter that I pretended not to notice. What would Daniel's mother think? Her name is Marlene, and for 2 years I told myself she was just protective, just close with her son, just old-fashioned. She called Daniel 3, sometimes 4 times a day. She had opinions about our apartment, our grocery list, the color of our bathroom towels. Daniel would relay these opinions to me gently, almost apologetically, like a translator softening a foreign language. And I would nod and adjust and tell myself this was temporary. This was just her adjusting to sharing her son. This would ease once we were married. It didn't ease. It got worse. 3 weeks before the wedding, Marlene called and said she needed to speak to me directly, woman to woman. At her house, no Daniel. I remember feeling almost relieved. I thought maybe this was it. Maybe this was her finally handing me the reins. Maybe this was the conversation where she told me she trusted me with her son. I drove to her house on a Tuesday afternoon with a bottle of wine I never got to open. She let me in and told me to wait in the living room while she finished something upstairs. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, and out of nothing but restless nerves, I got up to look at the photographs lining her hallway, the way you do in someone else's house when you're too anxious to sit still. Baby photos of Daniel, Daniel's graduation, Daniel at 8 years old holding a fish nearly as big as he was. And then tucked behind a larger frame, half hidden like it had been placed there on purpose and half hidden like an afterthought, was a photograph of Daniel in a tuxedo standing next to a woman in a wedding dress who was not me. I want to be honest about what happened in my body in that moment because I think it matters. I didn't feel shock first. I felt a kind of sick recognition, like my body had known something my mind refused to catch up to. I picked up the frame with hands that weren't quite steady, and I turned it over, and taped to the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a date, 4 years ago, and a name, Christine. Marlene came down the stairs while I was still holding it. She didn't scream or apologize or try to explain. She just looked at me with an expression I can only describe as relief, like she'd been waiting 2 years for someone to finally find that photograph, like she'd left it exactly where she knew I'd eventually wander. She sat me down and she told me the truth in a voice so calm it frightened me more than tears would have. Daniel had been married before, for 11 months. It ended not because he stopped loving Christine, but because Christine, in Marlene's words, wouldn't let go of trying to have her own house. Christine wanted them to move an hour away for a job opportunity. Christine wanted Sunday dinners to become twice a month instead of every week. Christine wanted a life that had room in it for just the two of them, and Marlene made sure that life never got the chance to exist. She told me this like she was proud of it. She told me this like it was a cautionary tale for my benefit, so that I wouldn't make the same mistake Christine made. She actually said the words, "Some women just don't understand family." And I understood, finally, completely, that she wasn't warning me away from her son. She was warning me away from ever asking for 1 square inch of a life that belonged to just Daniel and me. I asked her, once my voice worked again, why Daniel never told me he'd been married. She said he was ashamed, that failing a marriage felt like failing her, and that she'd told him it was kinder to let it stay buried. Kinder to whom? I asked. She didn't answer that one. I drove home in a fog I still can't fully describe. Daniel came in from work an hour later, kissed my forehead, asked what was for dinner, completely unaware that I now knew the shape of the room he actually lived in, exactly the way my grandmother had tried to warn me. I set the wine bottle on the counter, still full, and I asked him one question. I asked him Christine's name out loud and watched his face. I have never seen color leave a person's face that fast. He didn't deny it. He just asked quietly how I found out, which told me everything I needed to know about what he'd been planning to do with that information for the rest of our lives together. Never tell me. Just manage me, the way he managed his mother, the way he'd apparently managed a whole first marriage into the ground without ever mentioning its existence. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Not yet. I told him that a marriage he was ashamed enough to hide wasn't the part that scared me. What scared me was that he let his mother bury a person, an entire 11 months of someone else's life and love and hope, like it was an embarrassing photograph you tuck behind a bigger frame. I told him that I finally understood what my grandmother saw at that Thanksgiving table, and that it wasn't that he didn't love me. It was that there wasn't enough room left in his life to love anyone the way they deserved, because every room in that house already had his mother standing in it. I called off the wedding 9 days later. I sent back the dress. I told the venue the truth, more or less, and they were kinder about the deposit than I expected. My mother asked me if I was sure, if this wasn't just cold feet dressed up as a revelation, and I told her that my grandmother tried to tell me the same thing with her last clear breath, and that some warnings you only get to hear once, and you'd be a fool to need a second. I think about Christine sometimes. I don't know her last name, I never will, and I have no way of reaching her to tell her that a stranger found her wedding photo behind a picture frame and finally understood what she must have gone through alone. But I hope, wherever she is, that she got her own house eventually, the kind with room enough for just her. My grandmother used to say that some people don't get married when they say their vows. They get married the day they finally choose which room they're going to live in for the rest of their life. I spent 2 years thinking Daniel had chosen me. He hadn't. He'd just been visiting.